Okay, well, hello everyone. Today we're going to be doing an exercise where we're going to be doing this painting using only red, yellow, and blue paints. So this is one of my favorite exercises because sometimes by having limitations, we can sort of free ourselves up a little bit more to creativity, and also working this way mimics more accurately the way we view skin color. The paints I'm going to be using today are from the brand MaimeriBlu. They're a bit pricey, but I would definitely recommend getting these three colors. So they do a really good primary red, primary blue, and primary yellow that can be mixed to create just the entire range of colors, or close to that. And I'm just using fairly inexpensive acrylic brushes to do the details, and Daler-Rowney watercolor board. Although I would recommend treating yourself to some higher grade watercolor paper. I would recommend getting some line and wash board just to test your paints out, because the thing is that with watercolors, the paper that you use really matters quite a bit. The paper can be quite expensive, but one way to kind of get around this, I find, is to get some of this line and wash board. It's about 12 pounds for an A1 sheet. And just have that on your table. It minimizes mess. It allows you to experiment and get the colors that you want. Then practice your painting using, the less expensive watercolor paper before, when you have your final painting, going back to the more expensive paper. So you'll be able to get more layers the higher grade paper that you have here. So I'm going to start by thinking about the volume of the figure, and I'm going to be making a sketch that reflects that. So I'm thinking what side of the figure is facing towards the light and what side is facing away. And I'm making fairly dark marks here just so that they show up on the screen, but I would recommend using a high H pencil in your own sketch. The goal is not to see these marks. And you can always put them down and then erase them later, but the more erasing that you do on watercolor paper, the more damage you do to the surface. So I would recommend using, a 4H pencil or above to get these details down. And you can just pause at any point to get your initial sketch. So now I'm going to mix together a dark blue to make the underpainting. So since the technical color I'm using with the MaimeriBlu is cyan, it's a bit brighter than I would like to see for the cooler parts. So I'm going to mix it with just a little bit of red. And then when I'm happy with my color, I'm going to make sure I have a good amount of it to use, because you don't want to have to remix your colors as you go along. So now I can start the underpainting. So essentially, I'm building up the volume of the figure by using a higher concentration of paint for the darker areas and diluting it for the lighter areas. And what we're going to do is we're going to get this initial base painting down before moving over it with washes of reds and yellows. Okay, and now I'm going to mix together some yellow and a little bit of red. And very lightly, so I'm trying not to oversaturate my paper, I'm coming over with a layer of this very light yellow. And you want to really pay attention to keep the highlights clear. So leave some extra space in the areas where you want to see the white of the board for the highlights. And because skin reflects the light around it, we have an uneven distribution of warm and cool tones. So I'm coming in with some areas with a little bit more red, some areas with a little bit more yellow. So as we're working, we want to be thinking of how the paint is drying because we don't want to oversaturate areas with water. So once I have my initial washes sort of dry, and you can do that by working across the painting rather than in just one area, I'm going to come in and get some of the darker details by using more of a purplish mixture. So essentially the paints are mixing on your page as you go along as part of the wash process. And what building up layers like this does is it mimics the kind of watery texture of skin itself and the variation of reflection on the skin. Okay, so finally the hair and the darkest details. So you really want to let your paint dry a little bit before you come in with really crisp shadows. So you'll be able to get some really crisp lines, but only once the paint is dry. So save your darkest colors for when the paint has dried enough that you can make really crisp delineations. And the model I'm using actually has hair that's dyed kind of bluish brown. So I'm going to come in with more of a red mixture to get the shading areas of her hair in, just to create the contrast that will give the effect of a shadow. And I'm using a higher concentration of paint on my brush, but the contrast between the reds and the blues should go a good ways to give the illusion of hair that is sort of a darker brownish bluish color. And as your paint dries, you can come in with more sort of crisper detail. So you're sort of sectioning off the areas that you want to keep loose and detailed by varying the marks that you make, which are more saturated, and the marks that you make on drier paper that are crisper. And I'm just getting in some information about the background here. In the original picture, she's seated against some cloth, but here the point is, in getting a little bit of background, is just to get the context for the skin's color. So as you'll see, the skin is essentially reflecting the color of its surroundings. And you do want to be wary of overworking your watercolor. So your paper will get more messy, kind of duller, the more water you add to it. However, I would say don't be afraid of overworking your watercolors when you're in the experimentation phase. And the thing about water media is that you really do have to experiment to understand how they work. Because over time, you're going to get a sense of the feel of how much water is on your brush just by holding it. You'll get a sense of the sort of difference in effects that putting pressure of varying degrees of your brush on the paper has. You'll get a sense of when your paper is a certain amount of damp and how far the paint is going to blossom. So experimentation is absolutely key, and this is why I would recommend, instead of just starting with watercolor paper, to start with actually line and wash board or watercolor board, where you can actually get quite a few layers down. So you can give yourself that freedom of experimentation with wash techniques. And then if you want to do a completed painting of a particular subject and you don't want to overwork it, you'll have the freedom to do so with intention. But definitely experiment with this one. Play around with the washes, the effects of different textures, the effects of different colors, I'd say, in the background. With this painting, don't necessarily try to copy the painting in front of you. Just play around, see what effects you can get, and make a note of those to use in your future paintings. Okay, so thank you for watching, and I'd love to see your work. So don't forget to tag us. It's on Instagram at soho_life_drawing. Thank you.